Okay, I am live. Can everyone hear me specifically? Let me know in comments if you can hear me. I just want to be able to track this. Yes, it is starting. Can everyone hear me clearly? You can hear. Perfect. All right. We'll wait as some people manage to come in. It's probably going to take a couple minutes. I'm starting a little early just so I can specifically track and get things making more. I really did not want there to be a tech glitch because that was an issue. I want to say last time I did a major live stream like this, and that was kind of annoying. And yes, Voltorb is here. He's my big boy. Looks like folks are coming in. That's going to be good. Just to provide a little bit of context to folks who are coming in, the plan here is a regularly standard Q&A. I've done normally one of these every so often. Like I try to do these every 1,000, I think. Since my channel growth has slowed down, I think one every 1,000 is kind of regular. And as such, it's probably going to be around 2 hours. So it depends on the amount of interactivity, obviously, but I do think 2 hours is enough time. If again, super chats will be prioritized just so I can have something to track against specifically. And building off of that, you guys can probably jump in and out depending on how things go. Oh, also be sure to hit the like button because apparently that does boost these in the YouTube algorithm. I have no idea if they actually get that much boosted, but hey, if it happens, it happens. We'll see where it goes. Mm. Also, as per usual, again, I'm going to be starting this off with a little bit of a diatribe, or not really diatribe, more of a monologue in terms of where things are at. So we'll start taking questions fairly soon, but it looks like we're at 1 p.m. So let's get 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's get things started. Hi, folks. My name is Mark Grundon. I'm the host of Spectrum Pulse. I talk about music, movies, art, and culture. For those of you who do not know, I've been making music and album reviews for over 9 years now. That's like coming close to being a third of my life. That's a little wild to me. This YouTube channel's been doing quite well, but the subscriber growth has slowed down, which it happens, especially as you get to a certain point in terms of making YouTube videos. And overall, that's meant that I've actually had to rebrand and change a lot of things, especially coming after last year with the hack and a lot of slowdown, a lot of weird crap around this channel and my secondary channel Billboard Breakdown, which is actually doing about as well as I would otherwise expect, given that none of those go viral either. But the big changes this year have come with getting rid of scores, which I do think has been a net positive. If y'all care really that much where I fall on specific projects or score them, go check my Rate Your Music. I sometimes go back and update them over there. But also the pivot towards shorts. And I got to be honest, I did not expect to like doing shorts as much as I have. It's really forced my writing to become a lot more concise and focused. And I think that's a major net positive on my front in terms of just because sometimes I can be very long-winded, clearly, can you tell? But also, it comes to the element of me being able to get through more. Now, granted, I still listen to a lot of albums, and I would argue that 2022 has been a year where there's been a lot of complicated albums that require a lot of listens, a lot of decoding. And let's be honest, when it comes to certain albums, like from Billy Woods, or in cases, or from Arm & Hammer, it often feels like it's Music Critic on hard mode. But hey, at the end of the day, I think it's moving relatively smoothly. If you guys want to get albums on my schedule for the last couple of months of the year, link to my Patreon link is in the description down there below. Happy to have any of you guys come on down into that, where if you want to have conversations with me on a slightly more regular basis, that's actually in my Discord server. There's options to get albums on my schedule, vote on what's coming up, or hell, just supporting the channel. That's greatly appreciated. And one other thing I do have to say here is, given I've been doing this for 9 years, and I know some of y'all have been around since the very beginning, my God, But I am genuinely appreciative of all of you who actually have stuck around. Because again, this does mean a lot to me. That the fact that we've been able to do as much as we have, that the channel's been able to evolve and change so much, get through the hack relatively undisturbed. And that's meant a lot. Like, especially as I'll be honest, 2022 has been a much better year for me than 2021. And that's been really encouraging surrounding where things could go from here. Again, I don't know what all the future holds, and I genuinely hope that there's a lot more to be coming down the line. Again, my backlog is still pretty stacked, but I've got high hopes and hoping that there's going to be a lot coming. But again, things now feel like they're on the right track, and that's so encouraging to see. And you know what? Even a little bit of channel momentum. We're heading into year-end list season, and channel momentum right now is really good. But you know what? I want to open things up into some questions. Like, again, I'm seeing a lot of them that are coming in. Again, as I will say, I will prioritize super chats. Make sure to drop a like in the channel, to drop a like on the video. That helps it get boosted for whatever that means in the YouTube algorithm. That's greatly appreciated. But yeah, let's go through and get into some of these questions. All right. From Tiny Bubbles, if you want to make a top 10 list as off the cup as Todd's 10 top 10 90s buses, what would it be? The funny thing is that I love that video. I think Todd you could clearly tell he had a blast making it. And I really like when channels or specific creators, they say like, I'm going to do something that's wacky and offbeat and only I care about it. And they just go off the rails and then people actually embrace it. That's thrilling to see as a creator. I would love to be able to do that if my backlog wasn't stacked to the rafters. Todd's got a little bit more flexibility with that because he doesn't have the obligation to cover albums en masse. But honestly, I think there's a lot to it in terms of if I were to do one of those lists, it would probably be tied into television of some type because there is some offbeat, long-winded TV content that I would like to produce, and I've occasionally mentioned talking about. I have pieces to talk about Frasier, 2.5 Men, You're the Worst, Euphoria, the Riverdale essay, which is, I want to say 3/4 of the way done, but it means I have to actually go watch seasons 5 and 6, and I really don't want to do that again. But again, that would be something I would probably focus on there. Okay, what are your thoughts on Pendulum? Honestly, I have not gone into Pendulum that often. This is from Night Browser. I covered one of their songs in one of my song reviews. Thought it was all right. I actually thought there was a lot of propulsive energy to it. There's one of those acts that I've seen in my backlog. I've just never had a chance to get into them in the same way. From JCH Music, what year in the 2000s would you like to cover next? Good question. I actually had a plan to go through and cover all the years in the 2000s in terms of top 10s for both best and worst. It kind of got away from me because one thing you realize is that the early 2000s kind of are incredibly boring on terms of the Hot 100. It only really starts to get good, I'd say, around 2004. But the early 2000s are actually pretty rough in terms of what you would be getting. Because again, a lot of the weird stuff that you tend to remember as being epitomizing the late 90s and early 2000s didn't chart as much as you would otherwise think. And a lot of it was a lot of easy listening, slow burning schlock that's not interesting at all. So as such, I would love to go back and cover some of them, if only to diffuse some elements of 2000s nostalgia that I think are wildly overstated. But again, I'm not sure which year I'd go back to. I kind of want to go back and do 2007. I feel like there's a lot to say there. From Odo the Dolls 2, do you have any pets? And if you don't, what pet would you like? The sad thing is I don't have any pets. I'm actually allergic to both cats and dogs, and that kind of throws me off in that particular regard. I'm more of a dog person than a cat person, but again, allergies kind of screw me up there. I've also been told, I kind of wanted a snake at some point. So then I was told, Mark, no one would ever come to your condo if you had a snake in there. You become known as the snake guy. From Duderman, are you doing Spectrum Pulse full-time at this point? Are you still balancing a day job along with your review content? Yeah, I actually have a full-time job, and I'm still doing it alongside Spectrum Pulse, Billboard Breakdown, the whole spiel. That's one of the other benefits to pivoting to shorts that I actually have had. It's given me a little bit more time to focus on day job stuff as well as my YouTube stuff, as well as a lot of personal life stuff, which has really picked up now that the world's mostly opened back up again. And just the process of not having to do massive editing projects has given me my evenings back. That's been nice. But part of that's been like personal training, which I've been doing for a long time, and just been doing a lot of weight training. And that's been really rewarding, I got to be honest. From Dr. S, what are your thoughts on the new Smino album? I really want to talk about that Smino album. Somebody added to my schedule. So actually, someone joined my Patreon and added to my schedule because that Smino album looks really intriguing. And I actually really like Smino's feature on Saba's album this year. And I'm like, I should really cover this at some point. Make this happen, folks. All right. From Riley Lewis, what are your thoughts on Baby No Money? More of a thing in Canada than you would otherwise expect. The Canadian charts are not always better. I'll have thoughts about this potentially later on. I honestly don't get a ton of exposure to a lot of his music. Everything I've heard from him I haven't liked, but you'll see where it goes. It happens. From Leon Lynn, do you think Justin Timberlake's career is completely done? No, I don't. I think he's probably going to wait out another year or two, and then he's going to have another comeback release. You can tell he's been priming for it for a while, or he's going to go pivot full-time into movies. The thing with Justin Timberlake is that he doesn't need to do anything anymore. He's got more than enough accolades stacked up that he's otherwise fine, for better and for worse. I got to be honest, I've really soured on a lot of Justin Timberlake stuff, especially coming after 2018. And then the revelation of, oh, wait, this guy's been kind of a jackass for several years now. But hey, so we'll have to see where it goes. I do think he makes a comeback, though. From Aquila Sky, UA, has Bad Habit grown on you? Not really. I don't think it's a bad song. I just don't really care for it. I think if the bridge was not on that song, I'd like it a lot more. Favorite Beyonce album from Tyler Hackner. I'd probably say Lemonade, followed by 4. I mentioned that in my Renaissance review. Okay. From AJ Bloodstreams X, what are your 3 favorite songs in Good Kid, Mad City? Oh, geez. Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, Mad City, and I want to say Backseat Freestyle, because Backseat Freestyle just goes the hell off. So much fun. All right. Master Driver 132. Will Running Up That Hill be eligible for your 2022 year-end list? Yes. I got to say that now, and I know this is going to be contentious when it comes to a lot of people making the year-end list, because the way TikTok has really changed what's gone viral and what's persistent and what's eventually gets promoted to radio, that means there's years of content before that has now become eligible and has an actual real possibility of charting. You see this with Christmas music now pretty much all the time. Not a fan of that, Billboard. But I actually do think Running Up That Hill, given that it had a legit-ass chart run, better than it did at its time, and then also has now come around and had a radio run, had a streaming run, it's as legitimate of a hit as any other this year, even if it does feel like it's stacking the deck a little bit by putting, hey, one of Kate Bush's classic songs is now here. I will say this, it's not going to be my number 1. I promise you that. Let's keep going here. Thoughts on the Gabber genre, since you mentioned the genre in your review of Fasara by Rook 256. Gabber is interesting. I've heard bits and pieces of it, like just because of some proximity to drum and bass. I cannot say I got into it a lot. A lot of my research for it came in just trying to understand what Fasara was going for, and it intrigues me. I think there's a lot in that subgenre or offshoot of drum and bass that I'd like to hear more of, but it's really one of those subgenres I don't have enough expertise or the time to delve into as much as I would like to. All right. Okay. JCH Music, were you expecting Dawn FM to underperform? Looking at it now, I feel like Dawn FM was set up to underperform. It really was. And I feel bad for the weekend, because you can clearly tell he wanted Dawn FM to be way bigger than it was. But I think he and his management kind of miscalculated with how they want to roll that out, because After Hours did so well, but also had such longevity on the charts that I think a lot of people were just not ready for another weekend album, especially not one that really had the same type of punch of the initial singles that After Hours has. Like, it doesn't have a Blinding Lights. It does have some great songs on it, and the album did do better in Canada, but I feel that the promotion was kind of misaligned. I also think in going head to head with Gunna wasn't great. Like, it's a better album than what Gunna put out, but at the same time, he was also kind of setting himself up for, oh, you lost to Gunna in the album sales, ergo, we're going to write off the project. And I think that was really unfair. Like, I feel like that album deserved better stateside, or at least deserved more consistent promotion. All right. Let's keep going here. I'm just looking through one. From Aquila Sky UA, did Nonstop by Drake grow on you at all? No. Still don't care for that track. I get what it does, but I think it's very, very dry. I don't find it interesting at all. Okay. From Tom Katzwick, how do you decide what order you review albums in your backlog? Good question. Pretty much randomly or sporadically, or if I'm trying to build towards a theme or something. Some projects just take a lot of time to get through, so I'm quietly working through back catalogs, and some back catalogs are easier to get through than others. Prime example, someone added the new Diamanda Gallus album to my schedule. The thing with Diamanda Gallus, and I moved her into the backlog immediately, is that if you're familiar with her music, it's extremely visceral. It's very gut-wrenching in specific moments, especially the run out of the 80s. It's hard to listen to. You need to be in the right mood. You need to have the right palette for it. And sometimes I'm just not going to be in the right headspace to do that music justice. So it's going to take me longer to get to it, which is a bit of a shame. Tiny Bubbles, has Glimpse of Us grown on you? Yeah. We'll get to it when I get my Joji review out, which I want to say is coming in the next day or two. From Juhani Aho, has Ariana Grande's Thank You Next, the album, soured on you? I was never really a huge fan of it. Like, going back to my review, like, I think the album is really sloppily produced. I think the writing and the arc of the album is kind of mishandled. I think the album was rushed coming out. I think that ultimately has hurt some of Ariana's longevity, and it really did not help Positions the way it came out, because I think Positions deserved way better than it got. The sad thing is that Thank You Next, I know what it was capitalizing on a moment, but I feel like it was not always the best equipped to do so, and I think the singles they pushed from it outside of Thank You Next were kind of a misfire, at least for me. All right, let's keep going in here. From Sebastian, should Christmas music be allowed to re-enter the charts? Here's the thing. I bet Billboard is counting on the reality that certain Christmas songs or certain songs are only allowed to return to the charts if they break in beyond the top 50. And once they accumulate 20 weeks on the charts, they have to break in into the top 25. So it's a much more difficult endeavor to actually get Christmas music. I think Billboard is trying to rely on the existing Billboard rules to just ride out this wave of Christmas music coming back. And like, we'll get some of it every year, but hey, you won't get all of it. It might hamstring some of the momentum. I personally think that's a possibility, but in my opinion, it's okay that it's back on the charts. I have a real problem with it making the year-end list because it feels very unrepresentative, and I wouldn't want to see that stuff to overtake the place of songs that might be a better snapshot of the year overall. All right, I'm going to take a quick drink here. From JJ, favorite King Gizzard album? That's Not a Gone Infinity. Pretty definitively, too. That album's great. All righty here. Let's keep going here. Magic Micah 05. Which year would you say is better for mainstream music, 2020 or 2021? 2020. By a considerable margin. I think just the best hits were better that year. 2021 had really stark moments that I really think punched above their weight class. But I think 2020 overall was a stronger year, and I think that really holds up when you do a comparison beyond the very top tier, just into like the B and C list hits. All right, Tiny Bubbles, as a Rutgers alum, thoughts on Ron Harper Jr. and the Raptors so far? He's not getting a lot of playing time. Granted, the Raptors are hard to watch right now with Pascal Siakam being out, and I do think it's going to be I think he's probably going to get more of a rotation just to get a little bit of punch into the offense, but it's not good right now. Apparently, the team is a lot more Siakam dependent than I think everyone was expecting. All right. From Zach Sherman, favorite Dua Lipa song. That's Love Again. I said so back in my favorite hit songs of 2021, even though that song would have been big in 2020 if been marketed properly. Whatever. Outside Lane, thoughts on Ugly Season by Perfume Genius. Okay, I actually want to dedicate a little bit of time to this because this was an album that I wanted to review. I actually heard it a number of times, and I'll admit when an album's defeated me. And that album kind of did because because many times I listened to it, it became very obvious that it was intended with a dance accompaniment. And I saw videos of the dance accompaniment and I realized like I'm not a dance guy, especially when it comes to modern dance. Like in terms of some interpretations of what's going on with it, I can parse out bits and pieces, but it's not my strong suit. And I feel like that really inhibits it, how much I could enjoy the album because it feels like a piece is missing that I know is there, but I can't fully process it. And that kind of sucks. Excuse me. All right. Aquila Sky UA, thoughts on Bad Bunny's huge success in 2022? This is a big one. Bad Bunny is really the story of this year. I feel like a lot of people are not going to give him his due credit for as much as he's dominated the charts this year. It'll be very interesting to watch to see who gives him that credit. Now, the kind of problem is that there's a difference between popularity and someone liking them. And I gotta be honest, I didn't really love Bad Bunny's music this much this year. Like, there were songs on the album I really liked, but a lot of them were not the hits per se. Like, I get why it works. I get why it does well. It just doesn't have that deeper emotive connection for me. Some of it's not as tuneful, and I kind of wish it was. Some of it is also because I don't speak Spanish, so I feel like some of it has been lost on me. I'm not saying it's bad, but Bad Bunny is the popular story this year, even if it probably won't make any of the songs on my year-end list. Outside Lane, thoughts on Despecha by Rosalia. Can't stand the song. I think it's really lazy. I think it's one of the worst things Rosalia has ever put out. She can do so much better than she does. All right. From Grimmooze, thoughts on Lightning Bolt, the noise rock band. This is an interesting one. I like Lightning Bolt. I feel like their momentum has kind of fizzled in recent years. I've only gotten into them on the sides. I kind of think they were a little bit before my time when I really started getting into that side of noise rock. I like what I hear. I wouldn't go back to them much. I feel like I've only touched the surface of that band, if I'm going to be charitable to myself here. Let's keep going here. I'm not going to say anything about Super Gremlin because it making the worst list, probably. From Mr. Game Kirby CRLP, what made you get into the NFL more? Basically, how do I say this? I follow a lot of sports YouTubers, and a lot of them predominantly cover the NFL because the NFL actually produces a shocking amount of content in that lane. So a lot of it got really interesting. I kind of like how a lot of the teams pick up the personalities of their city and their fandoms really coalesce behind it. It can be kind of interesting. I also follow a lot of sports commentary over on sites like Defector, which is basically the second coming of Deadspin with all of their writers and much better politics overall after Deadspin imploded back in 2019. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into the NFL. I followed like Urinating Tree, Tom Grossi, That's Good Sports, Scooter Magruder. A lot of these guys I've been following for years, and it's generally very enjoyable watches. They put out some really good commentary. Okay, let's keep going in here. Where do I think Aaron Judge will land up? Wouldn't it be our luck? I keep hearing rumors that he's linked to the Giants. I'm not sure I buy that. I think it's not going to be the Yankees. I feel like there's going to be. I feel like Hal Steinbrenner is going to screw this up because again, the smart thing would be re-signing him with a truckload of money. But the Yankees have been very weird in terms of how and where they spend, even if their window is pretty open right now. I get a weird feeling that Aaron Judge is going to the West Coast. First bit of money would be on the Giants, but I wouldn't be surprised if he winds up on the Dodgers. Just saying. All right, so let's keep going here. All right. Favorite Stephen King movie? I don't really have one. I've seen a decent number of his, but I don't really have a favorite that I would go to out of the run of adaptations. I've seen a lot of bad Stephen King movies, which again, that's probably not a good sign. Zach Sherman, did you have any celebrity crushes when you were younger? I actually did. The one crush that I had when I want to say I was like 14, 15 was Hillary Duff. And I actually went to go see her live once, and she was shockingly good live too. And one thing I was actually pretty surprised by is she wound up relatively normal in comparison with a lot of the young artists and celebrities that came out in the 2000s. She married a hockey player. She moved out to Edmonton, which was pretty nice. And then they divorced. And she seems like she's got her life mostly on track there, which you can't say for a lot of people who came out of that era in the 2000s. So, yeah, props to her. Let's keep going. Franco19, have your thoughts on 1,000 Suns by Linkin Park changed? Not really. I still think it's their best album. Meteor is right behind it. I've got weird thoughts on 1,000 Suns. I don't see it being brought up that much anymore because since Chester died, like Linkin Park has kind of faded from a lot of people's perspective. You don't see that band show up in discourse the same way, at least not in the circles I'm around. I still think 1,000 Suns is wildly underrated. I think the production has aged, although a little questionably. I don't always like everything they did on that project. All right, from Master Driver 132, better song, Vegas or Get Into It, yeah. Get Into It, yeah, easily. I've said this before. I like it when artists who are not Playboy Cardi extrapolate from what he's doing, and that song has a real feel of a Playboy Cardi song with Doja also getting on her Nicki side, and it's a really nice fusion for her. I'm really happy she did it. Mr. Engine, do you have a playlist? I have dozens of playlists. I don't post on Spotify where those playlists are anymore. I still have an account on Spotify, a free account, but honestly, like the sad thing is I don't like Spotify in terms of all their data practices and everything with the Rogan last year. I'm like, no, I don't need Spotify anymore. I have Apple Music, I have Tidal. I've got playlists that are still representative and I've copied some of them over, but there's some playlists there that are mostly maintained, although I wouldn't say all of them. From Foo, have you gone back to Drogas Wave recently? Not really. I think that's one of those albums that has a certain amount of density that you need to be in the right mood for it. And I gotta be honest, I have gone back to Drill Music in Zion by Lupe Fiasco a decent bit this year. Again, hip hop has had a sneaky, really strong year. So there's a high likelihood that that's got a shot for my year-end list. Yeah, at least if that alongside with Miss Mural, there's shots for Lupe Fiasco to have a pretty good showing here. Leon McCory, did you listen to 2007 by Jid? Thoughts on it? I did, and I mentioned so on my review. Please go check that out. Sebastian, has I Like You a Happier song grown on you? No, that song's bad. I think that song is just awfully produced. I think Post Malone is phoning it in. I think Doja Cat is really phoning it in. I think the song is terrible. Franco19, why do you hate The Fragile by 9 Inch Nails? I think it's really trend chasey. I think the production's aged horribly. And you can very clearly tell that a lot of the deeper complexity of themes that came off of Pretty Hate Machine, The Downward Spiral, and Broken had really degenerated by the time it went to Fragile, which is trying to amp everything up to a different sphere. And it felt really artificial, really clunky. I don't think the album has aged well at all. And I've had plenty of arguments with my peers about this one. It doesn't work for me at all. Okay, let's keep going here. From Claire, with the removal of scored reviews, what would you do if, in theory, you encountered an album that you would otherwise give a perfect score? Good question. I would probably tell you, because here's the thing. I understand the reason why scores function the way they did. There was some friction I had with a couple of my peers surrounding specific scores, and the general point I have around that is, well, they don't work for me because I'm trying to facilitate more of a conversation. Although the ironic thing is that then I pivoted to shorts and probably a score there would be even more bite-sized and atomized. But at the same time, I ultimately think a lot of scores don't. If I had a perfect score album, I would probably just tell you that, yes, this would be an album I would score perfect, but I wouldn't take it with a huge grain of salt either. Just keep that in mind. From Iberian, super chat. Thank you very much here. Favorite trance song or artist? Keep up the great work. Oh, geez. I haven't listened to trance in years. I used to listen to a decent amount of trance in the late 2000s, early 2010s. It's been a while. The thing is that trance for me was less of a specific driven artist and more singles driven. And I had a couple of playlists that had a really good trance mix that I liked, but I would have to go back and check. It's been probably a decade since I really touched into my trance stuff. Let's keep going here. Okay, got some interesting discourse here. Okay, let's go from Tiny Bubbles here. Had your review go farther in lightness in 2017, how high would have it landed on your year-end list? It would not have been my number one. I think, again, it's tough to place things in context retrospectively. It would have made the list, probably in my top 10. Not sure if it would have made my top 5. It's a fantastic album. I think it's wall to wall, stacked with bangers. It does run a little bit long. I got it on vinyl finally, and you do feel the length at certain points, but overall, phenomenal project. It definitely would have made my year-end list. Josh Horobin, Stanye, Packer Biggie. I've had this argument with my personal trainer a number of times. Biggie is the better rapper. There's not really any qualification. I'd argue Ready to Die is the best album of the group, but I think Tupac is the better artist in terms of having more vocal melody, in terms of being able to create a sound, and a lot of stronger individual singles. That said, you could argue Biggie was also more influential given how he was tied in with Puff at the time. Like, Tupac didn't really have a lot of artists that followed in his wake in the same way in comparison with Biggie, especially in New York. From Michael Rothstein, do you think mainstream country is improving? Yes, but I think there's trouble on the horizon. And let me explain why. I think there's a lot of artists who realize that going towards a more neo-traditional sound is a net positive, and we've seen a lot of it this year. I will say this, country mainstream hits kind of saved this year. The problem is that the industry hasn't really caught up to that. I get the feeling that we're also kind of in a gap year when it comes to certain artists really pushing forward albums. So while we had a couple acts who really managed to land some very solid mainstream country traction, I find myself worrying that there's going to be a pivot towards stuff that we might not like. And the key thing I highlight with that is that we're starting to see a real uptick in songs that are trying to play for a really gritty, gravelly, quasi-southern rock-ish sound. And I got to be honest, I'm starting to find it getting a little bit tedious, especially as the songs are not often as tuneful or well-performed as they want to be. And I don't think the storytelling is there in the same way. So I'm keeping an eye on some of that because I'm not sure it's always going to stick the landing. Or you're eventually going to find those people who want to rip off Zach Bryan en masse without giving Zach Bryan the proper due he's deserved. That's coming too. Just fair warning. All right. From Ink Static, what are some genres you wish were better represented on the Hot 100? Oh, good question. I think R&B deserves better representation in general. I wish rock and metal obviously had a little bit more representation. That could be tough to get, though, at sometimes, especially as a lot of them are very radio-dependent genres. I actually put R&B tied to R&B radio and like rock and metal in the same boat. The failure to adapt to streaming in that specific economy has really hurt those genres. I'd love to see them cross over more often. Oh, super chat here from Zoom. Thank you very much. What do you think of the current rise of funk music? Do you think it could bring a few songs from the genre to chart? Oh, boy. I've only heard bits and pieces of this subgenre in passing. I saw some people like floating it around my Discord a while back. I gotta be honest, I haven't really had a chance to delve into it, but like with any conspicuous subgenre that seems like it's getting a little bit of buzz, it's really a total crapshoot if or where it crosses over. Just gonna say that. All right, another super chat from Dizzy the Spinda. Any recommendations for post-hardcore? Band I liked since I was a kid, got into from the inexcusable controversy. I need something to fill the void. I'm probably the wrong person to go to with post-hardcore stuff. Freely admit that. that said, the post-hardcore I like. Loud Dispute is fucking phenomenal. I've seen them a number of times. They're great. If I'm going to Loud Dispute, obviously there's the classics of post-hardcore. You're talking about someone like Fugazi, who kind of laid the groundwork. I'm not sure if I would call it more post-hardcore or more math rock, but the gospel album that dropped this year, The Loser, that album was really goddamn good. I think it's probably more prog on that side, but I think it's really, really stood out to me. And it's had a shocking amount of staying power. It kind of threw me off guard there. All right, let's keep going through here. From Mr. G, any hope for Camelot? I don't know. Is there? Like, the thing with Camelot is that they kind of peaked in the mid 2000s, and they've never been consistent since. I'd love for them to make good music. Tommy Karavik is now on the newest Epica EP, which was great. I'll be talking about that eventually at some point. So I'd love to see Camelot make great music. I think it's possible, at least. It's just a matter of it actually materializing. From Cruz Walden, thoughts on Superorganism's second album, Worldwide Pop. I know you enjoyed their self-titled debut in 2018, and you're the reason I got into them, actually. Oh, I'm so sorry. The second Superorganism album is not good. I listened to it probably 3 or 4 times. I thought it was really, really weak. I thought the hooks were not there. Controversy around the band kind of tainted some of their energy to me. It was not there. The funny thing is that if you want a good replacement for that last Superorganism album, go check out the newest Tegan and Sarah album, because I think a lot of the vocal affectations and the weirder electronic effects really pull together a Superorganism sound, but blended with Tegan and Sarah. And I actually think Crybaby is shockingly underrated this year. That album is phenomenal. All right, let's keep going here. Mike at the piano. Do you ever use Sirius XM? I do not. I don't have a lot of time to listen to radio, even satellite radio, and I don't drive, or I have my license, but I don't have a car, so I don't really drive in the city. I don't really have an opportunity to listen to a lot of radio. A lot of my work comes on going on Bandcamp, going to various weird playlists wherever I can find them, or just catching up on podcasts or albums in my backlog. I have so much stuff I could otherwise put into my ear holes. I just need to find the time for it. Adding radio to it doesn't really do much for me. Let's go. AJ Bloodstream X. Do you think Kanye West will survive after the anti-Semitic comments? I've talked around this because I think this is an extremely loaded area to get into. The one thing I want to say here is that nobody should be surprised that Kanye said any of this. It's not that a lot of the signs were there, even though they were. It's not like we haven't seen his insane dalliances with some utterly batshit stuff going far back as 2015, 2016. A lot of the seeds were planted early on. What I think will go often unremarked upon is that a lot of the anti-Semitism that Kanye has brought up is more widely seen in hip-hop and more widely commented upon than some people want to admit. One thing that I noticed when I went back and did my late 90s underground hip-hop retrospective is there's a lot of really nasty conspiratorial undertones to a lot of projects that came out in that era where there was definitely flavors of anti-Semitism. Hell, you go back to a song like The Story of OJ from Jay-Z back in 2017. Definitely flavors of anti-Semitism there. It was not surprising to see that stuff come out of Kanye's mouth. It's also why it wasn't a surprise that hip-hop's had kind of a messy time dealing with all of it. It's really a hard conversation to tackle, but again, nobody should be surprised by this. And I'm really getting sick of, and do I think his career's over? No, I don't, because I think there's a lot of his audience that's also very okay with this, a predominantly white audience of white guys who are predominantly fine with this, who want to embrace being a hype beast and otherwise believe a lot of the shit he's saying. I think that's the real thing that needs to be examined here. And I think a lot of his audience is too scared to actually have the introspection to confront what Kanye's been saying for the past decade. Okay. Sorry, I went off a bit of a tangent there. Next one from EYTPS. Opinions of the group The Buggles. Their 2 albums as well as Aqua's album Megalovania. Haven't heard Megalovania. The Buggles. I was most familiar with them through Todd doing the One Hit Wonderland episode. Um, I they're fine for what they are. They're kind of in that nerdcore territory, which especially coming out of the late 70s, like acts like Devo, they don't always click for me as strongly as I would like. I think some of it comes down to vocals, and they didn't have to be great singers, and they carried themselves with a lot of presence. It just didn't click with me as strongly as I was hoping, and that kind of frustrates me more. It's really good songwriting. I think the synth work is actually pretty well produced for that era, but they weren't someone I would go back to. Okay. All right. From Grim Ooze, thoughts on King Cruel. I actually reviewed King Cruel back in 2020 on one of the episodes of On the Pulse. I kind of talked about the catalog in general that King Cruel has. I got mixed opinions. You need to be in the right mood for King Cruel, and I don't think he's made anything that's truly great. Although there's more stuff that I will defend than I won't. I'll say that. Okay. All right. Thoughts on Rich Brian from Riley Lewis. Rich Brian, he's not for me, but he seems fine. They had the one song that went crazy viral in Canada earlier this year, had a lot of staying power. Again, not for me, but I'm not really going to complain about it either. It's fine. From Sebastian, do you think Morgan Wallen will be able to keep his momentum during the rest of the 2020s? No way of determining that. I think that he's got his label support. He's got enough friends in the industry to keep traction going. I think the problem will be that Morgan Wallen this is going to sound bad, he kind of blew his load all in 2021. I feel like him trying to regain any momentum will be determinant on that next album. And I don't think he's going to be able to pull the same double album card twice. I think there's going to be a lot more of a sharper scrutiny on him. And a lot of the mistakes that were kind of glossed over with Dangerous, they're going to come out a lot sharper this time. Excuse me. From Just a Zach, thank you for the super chat. Which artist charting on the Hot 100 do you think will have another hit or career? It's really tough to tell. I got to be honest. It's really hard to tell with a lot of acts that are trying to get traction now these days because TikTok virality is so short-lived. I do think Gail has an opportunity. Yes, the girl who did ABCDEFU, I think she's got a lot of potential that often goes unremarked upon. The one thing that I will say there is I do think, apparently from what I've heard from colleagues who have actually seen her live, apparently she's really good live. Apparently her labels actually tried to put some work behind like getting her on stage and building a grassroots following and fandom. She'll need that, especially as I think TikTok has otherwise taken upon themselves to ruin her career. But I think that especially that second EP she put out showed that she's got a lot of real potential. And I want to see her follow through on it. I really do. From EYTPS, did you see Reason TV's vid on why elite critics hate Kenny G? I did not. Also, okay, the reason why a lot of people do not like Kenny G is that it's the belief of that it's not so much you're hating the artist and you're hating the music, it's you're hating what he represents. That's kind of the feeling I have when a lot of people come down on a lot of easy listening or smooth jazz in that lane. It comes across as representing a specific scene and lifestyle that they have no interest in, or it is absolutely not cool. It's basic. It's silent majority music. With Kenny G, I often feel that there's the added part that he views as a bit of a gentrification of a lot of jazz, which is predominantly black. And it also comes from a lot of subcultures where there's a lot more technical experimentation than a lot of what Kenny G does. He produces a very whitewashed, very clean form of the genre. I can imagine that's why a lot of people dislike it. It's kind of the reason why I don't really care to talk about it. I just don't find it very interesting. Michael Network, thoughts on the Takeoff situation. First off, rest in peace, Takeoff. Gone way too soon. It was genuinely shocking and legit hard to watch to see the video. I do not recommend you look it up because, again, we don't need to see that. I'm going to be careful what I say around this because some of us actually have to go outside at some points and interact with the rest of hip-hop culture. So the thing with Takeoff is that he was innocent. It was an accident. Like, he wasn't specifically targeted from what I understand of that scene. So if he was in a bad situation at an inopportune time, I think that speaks a lot to that specific area. Like if you're in an area where folks are just playing dice games, and depending on whether or not it was a licensed gambling establishment, it's a really bad situation. But hell, I've been to bars that play dice games. I've played dice games. I understand what that's like. And the fact that if you're in the United States and there's so much action and activity surrounding guns, where folks have to carry a lot of guns, especially if you're traveling with that much jewelry and that much additional wealth on you, where you have to protect yourself. Otherwise, you become a target. I just think it's a confluence of a lot of wrong things at the bad time. I don't want to delve into the Jay Prince side of things too much, because I've seen a lot of rumors floating around, especially in Houston at that point. It's some ugly shit. And takeoff, it was taken from us way too goddamn early. From EY TPS, opinions on Russia's power windows. Hold your fire. Not familiar off the top of my head. Got to apologize there. It's not something I could really coherently speak on. From Sebastian, what single from Dawn FM would you like to get pushed next? Good question. Why has Less Than Zero not been pushed? It feels like the sort of radio slow burn that would be an automatic slam dunk, and that has not happened. Someone at Republic needs to get on that and fix that, because The Weeknd deserves to be more of a priority on that label. Hold on a minute. All right, from Mike Greatness 2000, how would someone get you to check their music out? Oh boy. Here's the thing. I don't take submissions for music to get reviewed. Some people have put their albums on my schedule on Patreon, and sometimes that gets things going there. Again, the one comment that I always say is be very careful what you wish for there, because I'm not about to be nice or be complimentary just because you paid to get access to my Patreon and put music on there, because sometimes I come down really hard, and I've had people who have requested music, and then they've gotten angry afterwards, and I've given them a middling or pretty negative review. Because again, my critical reputation is worth more than your album. So it's not always fun. That is a way to do it. But again, be very careful what you wish for, because in some cases, I'm just going to veto it outright, especially if I have nothing to say or it doesn't really add up to much more. From EYTPS, thank you, man. You're really putting a lot of super chats. I appreciate that. Did you hear about Kim Lucas's All I Really Want? Apparently, it's Eiffel 65 meme got to number 2 in your home country, and I'm very familiar with Eiffel 65. Do you remember hearing it as a kid? I didn't hear about that, so I can't effectively speak on it. I'm sorry. I'm Logan McCrory. Super chat there. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. From Akil Gaze, do you think like Demi Lovato will stick to rock music or go back to pop? If Demi Lovato's smart, they will stick with going more in rock music. I think it's a better fit for their voice. I think they really own that sound more effectively. And you can also clearly tell that was a sound that Demi wanted to make. The one comment that they made coming off their album in 2021 is that they couldn't tour a lot of that music. A lot of it was very traumatic for them. So coming in for 2022 with more of a rock-focused album, it's something that they can tour, and they can land on a rock circuit, which is very, very accommodating for acts that want to play stadiums, want to play that game. You can tell that Demi Lovato kind of does, and they've been comfortable in that scene since the late 2000s. That's the other thing I'm a little bit surprised by. So many folks are like Demi Lovato went rock, and I'm like, no, they've always wanted to go in that direction. This is not that surprising. From Legant, did you know anything about K-pop beyond BTS, Blackpink, or Psy? I know a surprising amount about K-pop. I've had to cover a lot of it. Again, they often come across it on the pulse. I've talked about it twice a number of times. I've talked about There's a couple of acts that I've talked about a number of times that really jump out to me. So there's a lot of them I've talked about over the course of the past 3 years. Not a lot of them always stick with me in the same lane. I think it's a language issue on my front. I'll freely admit that's a weakness there for me. But again, if it sticks. Opinion on VG composer Tim Follin. Folks really need to stop asking me to cover like video game content, because again, I'm not a huge gamer, not the way I used to be. So as much as I appreciate folks who really want me to get into that scene or cover more of that sound, it often feels very niche to me. And I feel like I'm losing some of the additional context that would be effectively speaking on that genre or subgenres. It's not a bad thing. I get why people like that sound. There's certain video game scores that do stick in the memory, but again, I feel like I'm only getting half the picture, and I feel like it's inappropriate for me to really speak on it because I'm not hugely familiar. From Aunt Bing, thanks for the $1 super chat. I appreciate it. Favorite Steve Lacy song? I don't really have many. I like the stuff that Steve Lacy did with the internet. That was cool. I honestly like a lot of that stuff a lot more than the stuff that Steve Lacy's been putting out solo. From the Wizard, in the spirit of Todd's bus video, what is your favorite 90s bus? Oh, Magic School Bus. Obviously. Like, I was a huge Magic School Bus kid growing up. I was so happy that was his number one. I'm like, yes, Todd, you get us. You get us. From Quaven Bloom, would you ever consider bringing back Resonators? Here's the thing with Resonators. I loved doing that series. I genuinely thought it was so rewarding in terms of getting a chance to talk about older acts. It really deepened and improved my knowledge of hardcore and of underground hip hop. I thought it was a really tremendously rewarding experience. Nobody watched it. Like, unless there were specific albums that actually got traction or had enough of a background and mainstream following, nobody cared. Like, I put out some of the episodes and I'm like, yeah, I hope this does well. And it doesn't. It's a little heartbreaking, to be honest, because Resonators was a series I really enjoyed. And the interviews I think I got the chance to do, though, they were a lot of fun. Like the Sage Francis interview, especially, even though that there was a bit of technical hiccups ahead of time before then, but I'm really happy that some of them worked. I just wish they got any traction. They just never did. I might bring it back at a later basis if I have more time, but again, it's not immediately in the cards for me. From EYTPS, thoughts on Amy Grant or Michael W. Smith? I don't know a lot of Amy Grant, but I did listen to Michael W. Smith a little bit in the mid-2000s. Like, I went to a Catholic school, so some of it came over, even though that was less evangelical at that time. So I heard bits and pieces of it. I remember doing some of it for choir. Wasn't bad. Again, I think a lot of the arrangements come across as very sterile. I don't find a lot of the music to be especially interesting, but for each their own. Let's keep going through here. Logan McCrory, are you a fan of the 2004 album Mad Villainy? Yes, I am. A classic album between the late MF Doom and Madlib. Completely, I am a fan of that album. I do think it's a tough album to like individualize specific cuts from it, but I do think as a whole, it's excellent. No qualm saying that at all. From Outside Lane, has Sweetest Pie shrunk on you? Sweetest Pie is fine. It is the definition of a very middle-of-the-road song. It tries so hard to be more than what it is, which I think it doesn't use either Dua Lipa or Megan all that effectively. I'm just not really a fan. It feels a bit like it feels a little bit awkwardly oversold for what it is, and that does bug me a bit. All right, from the Wizard, what is your favorite Brockhampton album? That's Iridescence, although that new album is looking interesting, although I have no idea where it's all going to fall out. Again, some of the rumors I've heard swirling around it are questionable. Leave it at that. EYTPS, thought on the opinion on the Blair Witch Project. Saw it once, didn't really care for it. I felt like it was a lot of hype for what it was doing at the time, and I don't think it's aged particularly well. And I think the sequel is absolute garbage. From Unknown Speeds, do you think Future Sex Love Sounds aged well? That's fascinating because I think it was very emblematic of a sound at a time. I think what Timbaland was doing with a lot of those grooves is so emblematic of that period between 2005 and 2007, 2008. It was interesting. It was very different. It sounds unlike a lot of other sounds that folks have tried to go into. A lot of folks have not been able to rip it off either, which is also kind of reassuring. I do think a little bit that it's aged poorly with perspective to Justin Timberlake himself, who's had a pretty rough couple of years. But outside of that, I don't know. It's going to be tough to say. It'll be curious to see if folks actually start drawing influence from it with the 2000s revival in full swing. From Justice Eck, favorite Pink album? That's Misunderstood. I think that's probably her best, although I'm Not Dead is a sneaky second contender, even if I think it's aged really awkwardly. From Spirit Charts, what are your predictions for the Grammys Best New Artist? The Grammys are going to do something stupid with Best New Artist. They do so every year. I have no clue what the nominations are just yet. Honestly, it's the Grammys. Again, I have very little. I think Mike the Snare did very good work in discussing and documenting the Grammys. At this point, it's hard for me to care about them that much. It is an industry rewarding itself and an industry that is built to self-reinforce itself. It's not going to actively deconstruct and get the stuff that's actually challenging the industry. It's going to get the stuff that makes the industry look good. And I don't have a lot of respect for that. If you want to work inside the industry and reinforce it, and you can make great art while doing so, all fine and dandy. Go for it. But I also think there should be room for the artists that are seriously challenging things, and the Grammys is not set up to reward that. From EYTPS, Tim Curry previously had a music career. Did you know? No, I did not know. I did not know Tim Curry had a music career. I'm not familiar with anything he did. All right, from the Keeper of Chaos, thank you so much for your work. Any thoughts on Bad Sons? I've had a number of folks trying to recommend Bad Sons to me. They have production issues. Like, I feel like this is one of those rock bands that would be able to get off the ground if I could get past their sound. I haven't heard a lot there that's really grabbed my ear yet. It's one of those albums, again, I've been recommended. I keep getting people pushing for it, but haven't really been hooked. From Mike at the Piano, if you gave Voltorb a voice, what would it sound like? Well, you'll have to see. I've got plans for that. From JCH Music, do you think Glass Animals will ever have another hit? Tough to tell. I think yes. The reason why is that they are in a label situation where when Heat Waves became as huge as it did, it kind of built them in a certain amount of radio groundswell as well. So they are now a radio known act. That's built some relationships. So if and when they put out a follow-up album to Dreamland, I think they've got enough of the foot in the door that they might get another minor hit. I don't think they'll have anything as big as Heat Waves ever again. Thank God for that. Oh, God. From EYTPS, wokeness threatens classical music. Barf. I think a lot of people do not get the point of that video essay that actually exposed how the predominant Western framing of a lot of music often does it a disservice in terms of musical notation, in terms of how a lot of the way music is taught is from a very neoclassical point of view. It's based on the old Baroque music. It's based upon the movements that came out of predominantly Europe. But that's not always the best way to examine musical notation. Take a look at blues or jazz or any sort of microtonal music whatsoever. I feel like a lot of that is saying wokeness is threatening classical music is kind of horseshit, because sometimes you need a different frame of reference in order to expose yourself to how certain other art forms are meant to be consumed or otherwise approached effectively. Putting a lot of arguments about that is just a lot of people being very disingenuous and wanting to write off entire cultures. EITPS, would you talk or debate YouTuber Vouch? No. I'm not a big fan of political debate YouTubers. The funny thing is that I actually came from a background in debate. I know, can you tell? I think my frustration with it is that a lot of online debate is less about actually engaging with the ideas and more talking heads talking past each other. And I feel like that's kind of missing the point, because everyone wants to get on the soapbox and talk at length about each other, but you're not really changing anybody's minds. And I feel like any specific debate that I got in with any Twitch streamer like that, it would be ultimately too confrontational, and it wouldn't actually result in anything effectively changing. And I feel like that's kind of a waste of my time. Mr. 96, hey, nice to see you here. What was the defining genres of the 2000s? You're talking crunk, R&B, pop punk, I'd say post-grunge, I'd say the retro revival of post punk. I'd also say certain brands that were coming out of like the indie pop and bedroom pop that like acts like of bedroom pop's the wrong way, but something like the acts that were following in the vein of Animal Collective and a very twee sound that was coming out of that lane. That was also very emblematic of that era. I'd also say near the late 2000s, you get Electro Clash and scenes like that popped off. The revival of metalcore was a huge thing there, and especially the mainstreamification of that genre. All right. Best song okay, hang on. Tiny Bubbles, best song on the Backstreet Boys album, Black and Blue. Black and Blue is really uneven. I'd say the first half of that album is really good, but I think it falls off pretty sharply. I'd probably go with Shape of My Heart. That's the one that sticks out for me the most. Really hard to sing live, though, speaking of someone with experience. As far as thoughts on Coldplay, I did an entire tiers list video over with my buddy Luke on Rock's channel where we went through every single Coldplay album. We talked at length for about an hour, had a blast doing it, and I highly recommend you go check that out. Thoughts on Bam Bam after months. Don't care for it. It's one of those songs like I think Bam Bam bugs me because Psycho Freak should have gotten so much bigger than that song. At least for me. I think Psycho Freak was friggin' robbed. That song's great. All right. Let's keep going here. From Valenti Gomez. If Truth About You had been a hit, would it top your list for the worst hits? Tempting. That song's bad. It's real bad, and I'm not sure I have a standout immediate worst hit of the year just yet. I need to go through the list to see what ultimately makes it there. It's close. It really would be. EYTPS, thoughts on the Crash Test Dummies? I heard a decent bit of them at some points. I feel like they kind of had one sound and didn't really do much with it. Like they were one of those rock bands that broke out and had a moment, but I kind of missed it and came on to a retrospect. I'm like, really, this is it? It happens. Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of folks are highlighting Unholy as the worst of the year. I don't think Unholy is the worst song of the year. There's songs that I dislike a lot more than Unholy. EYTPS, times where the Canadian charts were worked in the USA. See, here's the thing. The Canadian Hot 100 was only officially rolled out around 2006, 2007. So it took a little while for things to actually establish itself. I'd argue the Canadian charts only become worse than the charts in the States when they predominantly overlap each other. So that's like 2016, where the charts in the States sucked. And the charts in Canada also kind of sucked because it was a monopoly of Drake and Bieber, which were only more omnipresent up here. You thought it had it down bad out there. From Ant Bing, do you think Billboard would do anything about an artist releasing multiple remixes for a high chart position? No, because remixes have been built into the system for so long that I think it would be, I don't see it being very likely unless someone explicitly uses it to game the system like what Lil Nas X did. I'm not against the remix game, but I am against it when there's not a substantial change to the song. If you're just remixing it with a slight change in tempo so you can modify the ISRC code, what are you doing? We know what you're doing. From Cube Melons, any classic rock staples you never got the hype for? I've said this before, The Doors. I get what they were doing. I get what Jim Morrison was, but the compositions have never stuck with me, and I don't really like the writing. Again, some of this is an issue. I think a lot of classic rock can be wildly overrated and overpraised at the time. But then again, I kind of wish more people were doing a proper retrospective on that era, and that hasn't really happened. EYTPS, you're aware of the RPM charts, right? I've heard of them, yes. Oh, Logan McCrory, college dropout or late registration. I had arguments with this sometime earlier this year. I've always said late registration. The embrace of more jazz textures. I think the album is better paced. The skits are slightly better. And I think there's just more songs on that album I overall like in general. Okay. Thoughts on slowed and reverb. The funny thing is that a lot of the YouTube flips of like flipping a song for a Nightcore remix or like a slowed and reverb remix, They have their moments, but ultimately it feels a bit gimmicky at some points, especially when certain songs are always immediately flipped into that sound. It just doesn't do as much for me. EYTPS, how would music charts work under a socialist system? We aren't in a socialist system yet. And so given that socialism is widely considered a step away from established hierarchies, a more socialist system means that everything is relatively flattened out and some stuff's rise to the top or not. A lot of chart structures and the over-reliance on chart structures as a belief in a song's supremacy based on popularity, that's predominantly a capitalist system. I don't see that changing anytime soon. Be interesting if it did, but it's not going to happen. At least not yet. Lux99, what are some songs that made the Canadian year-end list, but not the US in recent years that you particularly disliked? We had Mamacita become a massive hit last year. Like, pay no attention to that. The Canadian charts are better. Don't look at that. It's over there. Oh, God. Let's keep going here. Thoughts on Ween? I haven't talked about Ween. Ween is one of those acts that's been on my backlog for a long time that a lot of people got exposed to thanks to associations with SpongeBob, which is also a cartoon that was kind of in a weird period. I kind of missed that whole vein in terms of that whole subset of memes. I'm not sure I really got it at the time, though. I'm not really a huge SpongeBob fan. I get what it was doing. It just wasn't for me. At the end of the day, I kind of missed Ween in the same mold. I get the feeling that they're a little overpraised online, but I would need to do a full deep dive to be fully confident in that myself. Andrew Barr, what are some songs that have made you cry? Oh, I've got a lot of those. Go back through my year-end list, and whenever there's a song where I get mildly choked up that I talk about in my year-end songs list, you will probably understand why, or where I find it tough to actually talk about it. EYTBS, opinion on the Shining miniseries. Have not seen it. I have not had as much time for TV as I would like to. What is my favorite Eric Church song? Good question. I love Doing Life With Me. I think that song's phenomenal. It's tough to pin down, though, because he's had a couple of songs in certain runs that I think have really stood the test of time. I think Record Year has just been an amazing test of how well that song's held up for me, especially from karaoke overexposure on my part. Master Driver 132, do you have a favorite music reviewer / critic? No, and I'm going to explain why. When I follow a lot of critics, I follow them for their rationale and reasons for why they talk about specific things. And oftentimes there's often such weird clashes of opinions that everyone kind of evens out at some point. You go to certain people for certain reasons. There's music writers I respect a great deal in terms of those who have elevated the craft and have really delivered something special. I put Stephen Hyden on that list. I put Nathan Rabin initially early on in his 2000s work on that list. Who else? Rodrigo Pasta on YouTube, I think, is tremendously underrated, and I think he puts out some phenomenal music criticism. But at the same time, it's also like there's a lot of people that I'm just continuing to read and follow, and whoever more people I put out and follow, then see where it goes. I'm comfortable with my list changing and evolving. Andrew Barr, how'd you come across the 3 Ps of protest songs? Because I needed a way to talk about political art, and I wanted to find a way to distill it down into something that felt representative to me of the politics that work, that goes beyond specifically a political point that I agree with. So something that was a cheap and easy formula I came up with, and I want to say 2012, 2013. I'm not going to say that it's all definitive, or songs that only have 2 of them right don't always will make it out as a favorite of mine. But I also feel like it's a good little baseline for me. I wouldn't hold it as an overarching standard for everyone else. Q Millins, are there albums you just couldn't get reviewed due to personal bias getting in the way? Yes. I'm not sure I could name any of them off the top of my head, but there are some albums that I would struggle to cover effectively because I feel like I wouldn't be as comfortable fully articulating my opinion as I'd want to. Go back to my old review of A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Erie, and you'll see how some of that manifests when I do try to review it. EYTPS, opinion on Tim Pool's music. The thing is that he makes phenomenally uninteresting music. He makes very much of an emo of a specific variety that I find is very dry. It's very dull. It's very clear that he put a lot of passion into it, but it doesn't have hooks. I feel like the production's very washed out. I just don't find it very interesting. EYTPS, Conker's Bad Fur Day and the Mighty Pooh. Oh boy. I played Conker's Bad Fur Day early initially on because I was a PC gamer. I feel like the jokes are there, but you need to be in the right mildly juvenile headspace to appreciate that game. I will say that. From Michael Network, got a couple of questions. Favorite and least favorite rap songs this year, mainstream or underground? Thoughts on the hip hop YouTube favorite rap diss song? Oh, there's a lot there. Not going to say my favorite rap or least favorites this year because I don't want to spoil my list. The hip hop YouTube favorite diss songs in the YouTube rap scene. I gotta be honest. I think a lot of the YouTube, looking back on that whole era of YouTube diss songs in 2016, 2017, it was really kind of embarrassing. Like a lot of the rapping wasn't very good. The punchlines were weak. What I generally thought is that a lot of the vocal delivery was not impressive. There were a lot of people who came on the scene with very limited idea of what to do behind the microphone and to present themselves effectively. That's why Rice Gum stunk so much. He was awful in that lane. All right, EYTPS. Reaction to the DK rap was a Hot 100 #1. It wouldn't be. Given that way how that song is marketed, I can't see myself getting thinking about that much. Mike the Piano. Favorite classical works or composers, if any? Not really going to speak on that because I would not claim to have as broad of a knowledge of classical composers, especially the compositions that have survived, to speak on it more effectively. I often just don't go back to classical music in the same way. I don't have time. All right. Do you listen to the orchestra, something in the version or the Zine E version? I actually really like the original a little bit more. I think the harmonica on the Zine E version is a little overstated for my taste. I kind of like how the production on the original is very slow burn and murky. It captures that experience of a dewy, just kind of humid early morning, and it's really effective in that lane. Were you a Yu-Gi-Oh kid? It seems like you might have been. Briefly, I watched a bit of Yu-Gi-Oh. I kind of caught the wave. I still have some Yu-Gi-Oh cards somewhere. They're stored back over there. I played a little bit. I preferred Magic the Gathering. I think the rule set was a lot more interesting. The power creep was also better handled when it came to sets rotating in and out. There's always a lot of chaff in Yu-Gi-Oh cards that never caught the same usage and balance, especially from what I followed with the Yu-Gi-Oh card scene. They don't have a specific block-based format, so specific cards never rotate out, and the metagame can get stale or overpowered. Line of lines. What makes you post a movie review? When somebody puts it on my schedule, and I managed to find time to review it. That was the tricky thing throughout the course of this year. I got a couple movie reviews requested. I got to them, but I couldn't get to all of them. One big one that I'm a little regretful that I didn't get to was Nope. Mostly because I feel like I could have done justice to that movie, but I would have needed time to fully sketch out my thoughts. Okay. Thoughts on Lost by Frank Ocean. I like the song. I'm a little shocked that it became a viral hit, though. From Carson Hume. Thank you for the super chat. With the success of Zach Bryan without radio, do you think others will be able to replicate similar success or will have an impact on the genre? Yes and no, because Zach Bryan is replicating a formula that Casey Musgraves did, coming out with her breakthrough with Golden Hour. It's slightly different genre, sure, but it's the same similar approach of just ignoring country radio altogether. It doesn't need to be there. Tyler Childers does the same thing. I think the issue is whether or not the mainstream tries to commodify that sound. I think they will struggle to try because it will come across as very forced, and we're already starting to see some of that happening. That's what has me really worried. From Cameron Lupke, do you think Demi Lovato's music is declining? No, not at all. I think their rock album was really quite good, and I like to see where they go for next. I really want them to get better producers, for God's sake. Demi Lovato has such a powerful voice, and I think that their sound really has a lot of potential, especially in that kind of rougher edge pop rock / garbage lane. And they could do more with it, but get Pop and Oak out of the studio with them. Come on. Even Conservapedia acknowledges this land is your land. It was against private property in their worst liberal songs essay. I'm not spending any time on Conservapedia. Like, there are times, like, the whole idea to, you keep eyes on that specifically stuff to idea what ideas are moving in the ecosystem, but I honestly don't care to indulge it that much. From Juicy Reviews, will you be reviewing the new Quantica album? It's been getting a lot of discussion in my Discord for both good and bad reasons. Some folks that I would expect to have better opinions are kind of mixed on it. I probably will cover it because folks are interested and the review did get some traction and attention. So we will have to see with that one. I am kind of curious, given that the one Quantica song that I reviewed on my song reviews certainly implied they were going in a more interesting direction. Okay, from Aunt Bing, do you think Die For You by Joji will become a hit? If 88 Rising knows what the hell they're doing, this is the problem with Joji right now. Joji is signed to a label that has no idea how to effectively market him beyond with the amount of traction and groundswell that he has. He's going toe-to-toe with Drake for her loss, and I think Die For You will get some form of promotion, but I also feel like Joji should be way bigger than he is. I will say that, even if I don't think Smithereens is that good. From Desmond Maynard, $2. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Favorite shit show in sports. Have you watched the Denver Broncos recently? Yikes. Or actually, hell, have you watched the Lakers recently? That's a shit show. Asked in a previous stream, but I think it warrants asking again. How do you approach deconstruction of cryptic lyricism? Nick Cave, Shushu, Kate Bush. I think it makes sense to understand the influences of where it's going or try to place it in a thematic context that is more broadly accessible. A lot of what Shushu or Kate Bush or Nick Cave or all these artists, when they write in a lot of abstract strokes, they're often circling around a thematic element throughout the course of the album that can make sense. So overall, it's a very interesting conversation in terms of what will come out of it. It just requires you to be engaged and aware of the roots of that abstract idea. Sometimes it goes to looking up interviews. Sometimes it just goes to looking up their pool of references that they're pulling from. Okay, from EYPS, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Haven't seen it in a really long time. I watched it in the 2000s, I want to say. I'd have to go back and rewatch it. I remember it being pretty funny. All right, Save Your Tears by The Weeknd is the only #1 hit that you never reviewed on Billboard Breakdown since you started the series. What do you think of the song? I like the remix. I think Save Your Tears is good. I think the remix with Ariana Grande makes it better. I think the groove is pretty potent. I think the song ultimately, though, it's mid to high tier with The Weeknd. It's one of his better pop songs, but I wouldn't put it. It would go on a playlist of, hey, it's a good Weeknd song, but it's not a great Weeknd song. Cameron Lupke, thoughts on Prince Royce? I remember covering Prince Royce once or twice, like years ago, back on old episodes of Billboard Breakdown. I honestly don't remember much, to be honest. UITPS, the opinion on Train's most recent album? Have not heard it. And actually, when did Train last release an album? If they've released something since 2017, I have not heard it, and I don't really have any intention to hear it. I've got better things to do. Okay. Oh, let's keep moving here. Thoughts on Desmond Maynard. Thoughts on Nelly Furtado. I actually went at length on my thoughts on Nelly Furtado when I reviewed her 2017 album. I recommend go checking out that review. That's where I expound it much more at length. All right, let's keep going here. Outside Lane, which song is worse? The good ones or Sunday Best? Sunday Best pisses me off more on like, it's annoying and it gets under my skin more. But the good ones is icky, and the ickiness is probably what puts it into a tier of like, I don't want to touch this. Like Sunday Best is that slow throbbing headache, but like the good ones is that sinking gut level. Ew, I don't want to be here. TPS, opinions on the ELP's later work. Can't really speak on it. Haven't heard much of it. Thoughts on Bittersweet Symphony by The Verge. That sounds a lot of fun. I think it's kind of amazing how the reputation of that song has become inflated over the years, especially on online culture, but I put it as a pretty good song. I enjoy it. All right. Thoughts on the harp. It is an instrument and can be used well, especially when it's by Joanna Newsom. Who are your least favorite producers in pop music and why? Pop and Oak, I really don't like how they mix and master specific types of vocals, and especially how clicking and thin a lot of their production is. Frank Dukes also falls in that territory. Wheezy's been really getting on my nerves recently in terms of how he's mixed and blown out chunks of the mix on some of the works that he's done. It's been kind of frustrating that otherwise producers I like have really been problematic for me. It just kind of clicked in the same way. And I do think it's worth highlighting that a producer like Dr. Luke, even beyond the allegations, it's been exposed in the past couple of years that he's fallen off rather sharply. Thoughts on Ava Max? Ava Max is really cool. Let me re-step that away. Ava Max is not cool at all, but she kind of earns that. She kind of owns it. I kind of like Ava Max for the same reason that I like the underdogs that will come out. Like, you understand their sharp limitations, but at the same time, she's trying harder than a lot of people. The hooks are generally better than a lot of her peers. And if she had better management, I think she'd be in a much better state. All right. Let's keep going here. Thoughts on rock band The Eagles. I think The Eagles are more middle of the road than bad. I'm not one of those people who say, I hate the Eagles, man. And stuff that was quoted from the Big Lebowski. Like, the Eagles were overexposed in the mid to late 70s. I get that. And they're honestly, it's not stuff that you will go back to consistently. But the Eagles' good songs have mostly held up. They are a silent majority act of that era. Quaven Bloom, best member of Wu-Tang. Oh, you're not going to draw me into that, but I think I'd probably say Ghostface. Yeah, I'd say Ghostface because Ghostface has supreme clientele and fish scale. Least favorite rap producers. There's a lot of them I don't like. The problem is that a lot of rap producers can produce one or two songs I really like and then just have a sound that doesn't work. It's tough. Like, I wouldn't say that it would be tough for me to nail that list down. Opinion on the Studio Killers. I do not know who that is. Let's keep going here. Allison Lopez, do you think Anti-Hero will make the year-end Hot 100 this year, or do you think it will be caught between years? I don't think it's going to be caught between years. It will either just barely make the list this year, and I think it probably will, or it'll have enough longevity and staying power to make the list next year for sure. Grimmooze, any thoughts on Jeff Rosenstock? I've reviewed Jeff Rosenstock a number of times. Please go check those out. Although I will say this, the ska flourishes with Jeff Rosenstock I've liked a little less than pretty much everyone else does. And Piano, how to get into bourbon or whiskey? Also, what's your beef with Fireball? My issue with Fireball is I find it as a whiskey, it's lacking any complexity. It's very much, hey, you want cinnamon liquor? Here's cinnamon liquor. Drink that. I don't find it an interesting whiskey, a whiskey that actually builds character. My recommendation is to start with a whiskey that actually has not overwhelmingly peaty or smoky, or don't start with Scotch. Start with a whiskey that is a little bit more mild and then build your way into it. Start with it being with water or with ice, just to get more accustomed to the overall flavors, and then I would start drinking it neat. That's the way to do it. That's kind of the way how I learned how to do it. Or better yet, get it in a mixed scenario where you're mixing it with Coke or ginger ale. Iberian, favorite David Guetta or Avicii song? Avicii, I'd probably go with with Avicii, I would go with Wake Me Up. Favorite David Guetta? I'm basic. I'll go with I Got a Feeling. From Cameron Lupke, should Camila Cabello just release Latin music now? she's pretty good at it. Honestly, I'd be okay with that. I think I think she'd do a really good job with it. And she kind of proved it with Familia this year. Tiny mixtapes. Their prose is so hard to read. I don't follow Tiny mixtapes. Can't speak on it. Big one from Desmond Maynard here. Thoughts on Aaliyah? Okay, I got to be careful with this because I didn't love Aaliyah's music at the time. Like before she passed, and I know a lot of people went back and repraised a lot of her sound and that it was really special. It really meant a lot to people at that specific time. I didn't get into her, at least in the early 2000s. I went back to her music in the late 2000s, didn't really get it. It took a lot of time for me to understand what her appeal was. I think she was always kind of hampered by middling production that didn't really help her all that well. I can appreciate more of her sound now, but I also think she was taken way too soon. And I also think the R. Kelly factor of it all makes it a lot harder to really speak on a lot of Aaliyah's music now. It's kind of a shame because I feel like she could have a much more propulsive career, especially going into the mid 2000s. Why is Pitchfork reviewing more normie music? Because they want traffic and clicks. They were bought out by Condé Nast, and that is how you get it. You get it through traffic and clicks. And to be honest, a lot of the normie music can be pretty good. Like, I don't understand this desire to just shy away from some of this because sometimes popular music can be good. It's a thing. I've seen this question come up a couple times. Has Mammy grown on you? Not really, but I do think Provenza is a really good song from Carol G. No, we're not. Ink Static. Thoughts on Finn McKenty, the punk rock NBA? I really hope he gets what's coming to him. Because again, I'm not a fan of the guy. I have way too much history that I've heard around this guy that I find very, very distasteful. I've seen a lot of his content. I think he and I would very starkly disagree politically on the majority of issues. And I also remember what he used to write on some of the stuff on Like Metal Sucks. So I don't have the highest opinion of him. I don't think he and I would ever have a pleasant conversation. And I will leave it at that. All right. Let's keep going over here. Cardboard. Are you familiar with Gaius Guevara's solo work? I know some folks have really been trying to get Gaius Guevara on my radar, and I'm starting to hear some of it. Gotta be honest, I found his social media, and that was not fun. Actually, let me rephrase that. I feel like I've heard that strain of doomerist nihilism before. I get his rationale for saying a lot of it. I understand the roots of it, and I understand where that activism is coming from. Although, when certain artists have certain social media presence, it makes it a little harder to get into their content, even if you know where it's coming from and it feels authentic. And that's kind of what's kept me away from going as deeply into his music as I would like to, especially with that militant edge to it that I can feel is not oversold, not inauthentic, but maybe not as fully considered, even if that does have a place in the scene. UITBS, do you think Billboard will ever end the Hot 100? Yeah, if they did, they would go out of business. They are not getting rid of the Hot 100. They need it too much. Okay. Marty, I know you're not a big fan of Britney's music at all. What do you think of the critical reevaluation of Blackout in recent memory? I think that's a misinterpretation. I think Britney is a singles artist. I think she had an incredible run of singles in the late 90s and early 2000s. I think with the Britney album in 2001, I want to say, that's when her sound pivoted. It got away from a lot of what Max Martin was doing really well and felt really propulsive in terms of good pop songs. And she was going for more of a sultry, sexed up side of her that honestly didn't work very well. The problem is that Britney has a very distinctive voice that can be very forceful, but also inelastic. And that means that she's often very dependent on the production around her in order to coax out the sound. That was a big issue with Selena Gomez as well. So going back to Blackout, I struggle with the singles. I don't think that the production has aged in weird ways. I don't think she always worked with the best people. Although at the same time, I get why it's been critically reevaluated in the scene. I understand why a lot of pop stars are like, it's a hidden masterpiece. And I get it. It's not for me, but I understand why. Opinion on the Paranormal Activity films. I watched the first one. It's fine. I want to say, I kind of got sick of it after the first one. It was a cute gimmick once to watch in like university, which is when I did see it. But after that, I kind of lost interest. All right. Thoughts on the Tina Snow mixtape. I didn't cover Tina Snow in 2018. I think Tina Snow dropped in 2018. I didn't talk about Tina Snow. I should have. I think Megan has really evolved as a rapper since then. But I do think that she's also touched on. I do think Tina Snow was really a good way to show that there was that added little bit of potential in her sound that we wanted to see going forward. Oh God, you keep spamming me here. Opinion on Night of the Living Dead. In 1990, I haven't seen Night of the Living Dead in years. I remember it being good. I don't remember much more about it though. Sorry. Oh, let's get this out of the way. Thoughts on Born Pink by Blackpink. I actually did hear that album. I'm not going to review it because I don't have a lot of good things to say. And I got to be honest, it feels like the sort of project that was trying to build for a crossover and didn't work because it kind of neutered a lot of Blackpink's biggest strengths to try to go for a slightly modernized, like English-speaking audience accessible sound. And I'm not sure it worked effectively. I don't think the hooks are there. There's nothing as good as Lovesick Girls there. It felt really underpowered. Just not impressed. I'm not answering that other question there from you. Sorry, EYTPS. I know when I'm getting baited. All right. Cube Melons, top 3 movie soundtracks. Tough one to answer, honestly. I need to think about that one. I'm not sure I have an immediate answer off the top of my head, although I know Lord of the Rings is on there for me. All right, what else is here? From Rhea Nuisance, would you ever think of making a list with Rocked? I actually already have. We did the Coldplay list, and please go check that out. Actually, I already mentioned it in this live stream earlier. Okay. Okay. Do you have a favorite out of the big 4 Britpop bands? Oasis, Blur, Pulp, and Suede. I'd probably go Blur. I think Oasis had higher peaks. I think Pulp was more interesting. Suede I never really got into in the same way, but I'd probably say Blur was the most consistent. I'll say that. Okay, you're getting timeout. All right, JCH Music. What is your thoughts on how huge the Encanto music soundtrack became? Not surprising. It kind of has the same run that it actually had an expanded run of what Frozen did back in like 2013, 2014. The charts were kind of soft around that time. There wasn't a lot that was dominating the cultural conversation. And then Encanto became a huge thing. I also think the crossover with the Spanish market should not be overlooked. That was a major process to getting a lot of these songs a little bit more attention. I didn't always think it worked, and I'm not a huge fan of Encanto, but we'll save for year-end list for that. If you've heard it, what are your thoughts on Where Are You Now by Lost Frequencies and Callum Scott? I haven't heard it, but I'm not a Callum Scott fan, so I wasn't going to seek it out either. Inkstack, do you think Perfect Circle is better than Tool? I never really got into a Perfect Circle that much. I've heard more Tool than Perfect Circle. I don't feel equipped to fully answer that question. Unknown Speeds, why is Girls Aloud your favorite girl group? Good question. Girls Aloud is, for those of you who don't know, it's a girl group that was active in the UK from the very late 90s to across the 2000s. I think they are a tremendously catchy and really propulsive girl group. And the one reason why is they had consistently great production. And in an era where a lot of girl groups of that era didn't really have it, they kind of took the mantle of the Spice Girls of that time and kind of ran with it for an entire decade. They were huge in the UK, but they They never crossed over stateside, and that was a shame because Girls Aloud were so good. Music reviewer, is Greg Popovich the GOAT basketball coach? Ooh, that's a good one. Tough to say. I think it's a conversation between him and Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson's on that list. The tricky thing now is that minus Tim Duncan and Kawhi, it's really been exposed. Greg Popovich has had some gaps in terms of what he can scheme and plan open. You can tell they're trying to go for a more fast-paced offense now with the newest rebuild, but I'm not sure it's clicking, and you can kind of tell with where the Spurs are now. All right. Oh, let's get this one. Valente Gomez, what are your opinions on Stereotype by Cole Swindell? I've heard Stereotype. It's incredibly uneven, but that's pretty much the standard that's always been the case with Cole Swindell. A lot of his material is extremely uneven, and that's kind of been frustrating for me, which overall is like, yeah, like She Had Me from Heads Carolina, great song. I'm really happy that song did well, but the rest of the album's still kind of overproduced. It's just patchy in ways that really all of his work has been. He might be more of a singles artist long-term, let's be honest. Why did you choose Amnesia from, well, that song was retracted. Hang on. People are just retracting stuff. Let's keep looking here. Would you ever collab with Mike the Snare? I'd like to collab with Mike the Snare. He's currently doing his own thing right now, and I can imagine it's going to take some time for him to be fully processed and fully back into things. At some point, I actually was already in one of his videos. I was in the Eiffel 65 video listing off one of my favorite albums of 2021. So I recommend you go check that video out. He puts out phenomenal stuff. I'd be happy to work with him at some point. Let's keep going here. Were you excited when Bjork announced her album this year? I mean, I was. The thing with me and Bjork is that it was always the sort of artist that I appreciate a lot of her music, especially as I get older. But I wasn't always like seeking her out to the same way. Fasora really flipped me around. I'm like, oh, damn, I was going back to that album a lot, and I really like it too. Okay, let's keep going through here. Just looking through here. Oh, here's one. How well do you think Olivia Rodrigo's next album will perform? Not well. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not going to perform as well as Sour did. Very few things could have performed as well as Sour did. I honestly think Sour was kind of over promoted, especially by the critic press, because I think the album is good, but not great. Overall, though, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how she follows it up and who she works with to get that sound for how she advances. Because that album, the thing with Sour is that it is kind of one-dimensional. So we'll see where it goes. Opinion on Glitter starring Mariah Carey. Glitter's a bad movie. Like that's pretty well known. It's not good. Thoughts on Toni Braxton? Okay. The tricky thing about certain eras of R&B, like Toni Braxton, where she came from, I don't feel like I'm as knowledgeable about that time that I can speak on her albums effectively. I've been curious. I've heard a lot that I find is pretty good. I just don't know enough to say more, to be honest. All right, let's keep going here. Thoughts on James Cameron's Avatar? Oh, camera's out of focus there. Hang on. Okay, there we go. A lot here. I'll answer this one quickly. Criminal or You Ought to Know? Criminal. Thoughts on James Cameron's Avatar? I'm not sure why folks are going back to I'm not sure why James Cameron's going back to the Avatar well. Yes, it made a metric fuck ton of money. But the problem with Avatar is that it didn't really have a story that I think people connected with beyond the moment. Yes, it spawned a mighty fuck ton of furry art on DeviantArt, as you do. But at the same time, I don't think Avatar was the sort of film that really called out for more. It was an impressive technical achievement, but what is there in the story that I want to see more of? It wasn't something that would seem to inspire continuity. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what will come out of it, but yeah, we'll see. Are you interested in checking out King's Disease 3 by Nas? No. I don't want to cover Nas anymore. There's some people I've drawn kind of a hard line on. I've heard King's Disease 3. It's what it is. It's not surprising coming out of Nas. But there's certain things with Nas I don't feel comfortable giving him my platform, especially when there's so much else that's on the docket right now, especially given some of his history around Khalees that at least I haven't forgotten about. Michael Rothstein, do you think Eminem will ever make a good album again? I think if Eminem makes a good album, it's going to come with him actually being able to work with producers that is not him. If he's producing his entire own project, it's not going to work well. I kind of want to see him branch outside of that, work with producers that might challenge him or give him production that's a little bit more off kilter and weird. He's at the stage of his career where he could do anything. I want to see him do it. I would love to see him actually work with a lot of the underground legends. The one thing that would be actually really cool, when Eminem was accepted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he listed off all the rappers in alphabetical order that he wanted to recognize, and he went through a list of artists from the 80s and the 90s, and it was so cool. A bunch of rap legends he clearly adores. I'd love to see Eminem do like a proper like late 80s, early 90s throwback rap album where he's able to bring on a bunch of those legends. Because I think he would love to do it, and I think it could sound really cool, especially if he got the right production for it. Okay. Why does Jay-Z always act weird when Nas drops something? Because it's Jay-Z, and Jay-Z's petty. Okay, let's keep going here. Wait, did Nas get Me Too'd? Look up Nas and Khalees. You'll find out. What about Crack a Bottle doesn't work for you? I've always found the song more underwhelming than bad. I hate the rhyme scheme in Crack a Bottle, especially on the hook. It feels really jerky and awkward there. And it was one of those evidence of where Eminem was using the accents, but it wasn't in the larger context of Relapse as the album. I also think 50's verse on the song is terrible. All right. Ooh, check out It Was a Home by Kana. You might dig it. Maybe, maybe not. Master Driver 132, has Sunroof been shrinking on you lately? It actually has. The song was fine for being in the summer, but it felt very disposable. Like, it's not a bad song by any means, but it felt like it went viral for a very specific couple of weeks and then just move on. All right, let's keep looking here. Would you ever review throwback albums? Yeah, I talked about this earlier in the stream with Resonators. That's when I would predominantly do it, but again, since Resonators never really got a lot of traffic, kind of leaves me a little bit stuck in the lurch there. Opinion on Jesus Christ Superstar, the 1973 film. I've seen that film and I actually really quite like it. I think the vocal performances are excellent. I think how they leave a lot of the stagecraft throughout the movie is actually really interesting. They did a lot of that sort of not breaking the fourth wall, but embracing more epic theater practices that came out in the 70s. I think it looks really impressive. I don't love Jesus Christ Superstar, the musical, much because I don't think the songs really stick with me, but the framing and the setup of the movie is actually quite good. Desmond Maynard, thoughts on Amy Winehouse? Gone way too soon. I think there's a conversation of how much the retro throwback style that persisted from what she did in the 2000s, how well it's aged, especially into the 2010s. But she was one of the few people who did it really goddamn well. I was never the biggest fan of her at the time, but I do respect what she did. Rest in peace. Again, gone way too soon. And the fact that a lot of her demons felt very lived in is really sad. Any anti-capitalism albums? Come on, punk. It's right there, especially anarcho-punk. Like, there's a lot of music that fits in that lane. It's pretty easy to find, too. All right. Let's keep going here. Do you still use Rate Your Music and thoughts on it overall? That's a good one. I use Rate Your Music all the time. I use it more as a reference guide than anything. I use it where I occasionally dump my reviews of albums and then ratings months later. My general opinion on Rate Your Music is that it operates in a similar brand of groupthink that you occasionally see anywhere. Like it has a distinctive community, and that community has a distinctive set of interests that occasionally cross over with Mew or Sputnik Music or Pulse or other places. And you can tell that certain creators have an outsized influence on radio music. Not a bad thing, but worth acknowledging. I think that, again, it's a little, you can very much tell that it's a site built for a certain breed of music nerds, and they have very specific tastes. And that definitely influences what gets the highest placement year after year. And I think that could be, that's a bias I think that Rate Your Music could do to confront at some point. But overall, I treat it for what it is. I get what it is too. Oh, hey, Brad. Nice to see you here. Just wanted to say congrats, homie. Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Glad to see you over here. All righty. Let's keep going through here. Are you gonna check out Young Gravy's album? I've heard things about that Young Gravy album. Not bad things, but like I also listened to one of his albums beforehand, actually checking out his single because I heard interesting things. I like his voice, I like his delivery, but I think he's got like maybe one or two jokes, and he kind of needs to show a little bit more diversity. I'm kind of concerned checking out that album whether or not he would have it. Here's a question I've seen bounce up around. Where do you see Lil Nas X's career going in the future? I think that next album will be very telling of his, because I think what came from Montero laid down a good foundation, but I want to see him expand. And I kind of think that there's a lot of opportunities for him to do so. I think he's going to be a pop star, but his shelf life might be, we'll have to see where it goes. EYTPS, should we abolish prisons? Oh, that's a tricky one. I'm not going to weigh in on that because I don't think I've done enough research on prison abolition to speak effectively on it. I've done a lot of reading around some of the research of it. I think that prison should ultimately be structured more in a rehabilitative context instead of a retributive form. We want to be able to make sure that people serve their time and then be reintroduced into the community into the proper way instead of something that is very much hardline, just punishments. Although there's a place for that too. That's why this conversation is tricky. Thundercat, what rapper and country artist would make a good collab album? Well, I feel like none of you heard the Yellow Wolf and Shooter Jennings album that came out this year. That was a pretty good collab album. Iberian, thoughts on Breaking Bad? Are you a country bull? I'm not going to say what the last one is. Opinion on Breaking Bad. I have not seen enough of Breaking Bad. I want to. Like, I kind of missed it at the time. It was one of those shows that came out in the era of peak TV or when that was really cresting. And it was a show that was on my radar. And the memes are great. And from what I've seen in Better Call Saul, that looks great. And then I just kind of missed it. Opinion on Lost Prophets. We're not doing that. Lost Prophets and everything associated with that band, there's a reason why no one talks about them anymore. It's disgusting. Fuck them. All right, Master Driver 132. Favorite Janet Jackson album and singles. I'm a Rhythm Nation fan overall. I think Rhythm Nation really has a lot there that I find really interesting and fun. I think Janet that came afterwards was really good. I never got into the Velvet Rope as much. I feel like I need to give that album another shot properly. I went back to it like a couple of years ago, and Velvet Rope never clicked with me. That does bug me on some level. All right. Let's keep going through here. Thoughts on Willow? I see her more as a potential future to more popular alternative music, given how great and generally well-liked Coping Mechanism is. Is Coping Mechanism being well received? I wouldn't really say that. I feel it's been very haphazard in terms of the reception of that album, or at least in the communities that I've been around. I have not been all that impressed with what I've seen around Coping Mechanism. Oh, yeah, I heard Keith Levine of The Clash has died. I saw Steve Albini post about that. Rest in peace. Thoughts on Natalia Kills and Skylar Grey? Natalia Kills killed her career aggressively and fast coming out of her controversy. Skylar Grey, I feel like, never broke out the way that she could have. I kind of think that she got stuck with Alex da Kid's production way too much. She was never really able to distinguish herself as a songwriter for me. That's kind of what kind of hamstrung her. Is Annex Productions, would you consider reviewing the new Devin Townsend album? Yes. I've heard that album. I want to include it in an all-metal episode of On the Pulse, or I might do a solo review of it. I have a lot of good things to say about that project. Thoughts on Zach Bryan and Future? I kind of want to hear it. I was talking about how much Zach Bryan is a big Future fan. I've seen some crossover there. That would be really kind of cool because I can kind of hear how it would work. It would be bizarre, but I kind of want to hear it. I think there's potential there. I mean, Zach Bryan, like I can, again, it would be, you need the right producer for it. Like Zaytoven would be a good producer for it. Just in terms of being able to provide some of that little bit more of an organic feel of that bounce. Metro Boomin would be good for that as well. That'd be fascinating. I don't know who you're talking about in terms of Dangerous Minds. I don't know. I'm not sure what that is. Have you seen the Weird Al biopic yet? I have not. I really want to. I keep hearing really cool things about it, and the trailers look amazing. Apparently, it's going straight to Roku, and I don't have Roku, so I might have to find other ways to see it. I'll say that. Okay, let's keep going here. Cameron Luke K, do you think Selena Gomez is a good singer? I think Selena Gomez is a limited singer. I think you need to know how to use your Selena Gomez properly. And I think a lot of producers don't because they want to produce her as a pop diva sort, and she's not. I honestly think in the right context and subgenres, Selena Gomez can be effective, but again, she's limited. Okay. Opinions on the USSR, Cuba, and Venezuela versus the USA. We're not getting into political stuff. I know what you're trying to do here. Move away from that. All right, let's keep going here. Preference, 80s, 90s, or 2000s emo. I'd probably go, I like 80s emo a lot because, again, foundation point of the genre, and I think they were doing some interesting things with how they were expanding the sound. I think 2000s had a lot more flair and pop-off. 90s email doesn't always click for me. I gotta be honest. Like, some of it can be quite good. I understand the foundation points, but it was also the point where it started to reach the point of oversaturation, but without the flair behind it. Thoughts on Kids in the Hall and SCTV? SCTV is great. I have not seen enough Kids in the Hall to really speak on it effectively, to be honest. From what I've seen, it's really funny. Do you ever think there could be a superstar as ubiquitous as Michael or the Beatles? Taylor could qualify, but I'm skeptical. Yes, but it would need, but yes and no. The reason I say that is because when it comes to someone like Michael Jackson, the cultural ubiquity that came out of a very limited method of music distribution and popularity at that time. Like, we have so many more options now because of the media. So cultural presence at large fragments. It becomes fractured. You don't have that monolithic presence that can dominate the conversation in the same way. That being said, that's not saying it couldn't happen. It just needs to have the right conflux of proper things to actually happen in terms of popularity, in terms of commercial backing, in terms of actual some degree of quality. I think that it's a lot more fragmented, a lot more difficult in the era of the internet, but it's possible. The Fairlight CMI. I know about Kate Bush because of it. I'm not familiar. Mark, what's your favorite AJR song? The one I'd probably defend the most would probably be Sober Up. It's probably got the best hook, and Rivers Cuomo doesn't completely humiliate himself on it. It's not a good song, but I'd say it's okay. Thoughts on Seabat, the Reddit sex song? Some of you did not know Hudson Mohawk before now, and that I find very funny. It kind of went viral for a moment, but some of us have been aware of this song for a lot longer. Thoughts on Alicia Keys? I've reviewed Alicia Keys a couple times before, back most recently in 2016. I thought her material has gotten a lot less interesting since The Diary of Alicia Keys back in 2004, but for the music that she makes, is very respectable, very prim. She's an incredible singer, an amazing pianist. I kind of wish she was able to do more with her sound, though. It feels often a little restrained for what it is. All right. Oh, what do you think of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds Dig Lazarus Dig? That's a tricky album because it came out in between the Grinderman projects, and you can definitely tell the Grinderman side was rubbing off on Nick Cave on that project. But it's also a project that kind of eats itself alive. Like, songs like We Call on the Author to Explain, and certain moments very much tell that it was kind of getting recursive in how much it was writing about itself. So it kind of was digging to the bottom of something and it didn't really find anything. It feels weirdly hollow in spots. And that kind of frustrates me about the project. It's a weird period in Nick Cave's catalog. I will say that. In a song list in the 1980s, would you qualify a song appearing on the Cashbox year end? Probably not. No, I'd probably stick with just the original Billboard list. We're coming up on the end here. Not a lot of people will stick around. Over 100 of you. Wow, that's impressive. Oh, here's one. Why did you choose Amnesia from Chumbawamba as the intro of Billboard Breakdown? Well, I actually thought it was apropos. I've been a Chumbawamba fan for over a decade now, comfortably. And the thing that I loved about that song is that it's very indicative of how we treat pop music, disposably, how we treat the charts as a joke. The entire point that I used Amnesia was very much of, hey, like, do you suffer from long-term memory loss? I can't remember. Especially in the context of Tub Thumping, where so much of that album was about the art of making protest music. And hell, in the context of the charts and how much we all really remember it, that kind of is ultimately the underlying idea. Will you review Black Eyed Peas Forgive My Screaming? Are you talking about the new album that dropped? I have no desire to. I heard Translation. Apparently this album is just the extended version of that. Oh boy. Opinion on rappers MC Lars and Caswell. I don't know who they are. I'm a little surprised you're so lukewarm on Alessia Cara's new album. Yeah, her radio single was not it, but I thought the rest was actually some of her best work yet. Her issue is production. I feel like Alessia Cara kind of got into a lane where like it never like the momentum didn't materialize. I feel like the hooks aren't there. I feel like the writing isn't as there as it should be. I feel like there was potential, but it just never quite clicked. All right, we got about 5 minutes left before I sign off here. This has actually been surprisingly good. So once again, thank you all for swinging by. If you guys want to get your questions, especially super chats, now is the time to do so. All right. Thoughts on the new Brockhampton singles? I've not heard them just yet. I kind of want to, but the album is coming. If you ever watch Glee, do you favor any of the show's covers over the original songs? Not really, but I do think some of the covers stand alone as good songs. I will say that. Especially some of the mashups. The mashups actually were remarkably well done. Favorite ice cream flavor? I'm a mint chocolate guy. Although cookies and cream is also pretty good too. Any recommendations for underground albums I should hear since the mid-year list? I put out a lot of shorts, and a bunch of the shorts that I've said are my favorites. I've got a playlist for my favorites. Go check those out. Thoughts of your favorite band, as if I could have just one. Is there any controversy for an artist outside of their music changed your opinion on their music? Almost all the time. Because the controversy often reshapes and reforms how I contextualize their music. So I tend to actually pick up on it a decent bit. Like, it's not the sort of thing, I don't separate art from the artist in the same way. I treat it as additional information. So it becomes a complexifier to the conversation. Can Spotify be useful in getting into unfamiliar genres, styles, and movements? I mean, one thing I saw in terms of some statistics is that Spotify will only ever show you a certain subsection of music compared to the vast swaths of it on the platform, with limited to no curation, and a lot of the curation being bought off, that a lot of it, you're not going to get the most prominent artists being able to, like, the most prominent exploration into the scene beyond the biggest names. And that can work, but it doesn't always get you those favorites of favorites that might be more worthwhile in providing a broader context. Opinion on Farside Virtual by James Ferrero. Not familiar. Thoughts on Phototroph by Moontooth. Have not heard it, although I know a lot of people are really into Moontooth. Have you heard of the YouTube channel The Recording Connection? No. Opinion on Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross is awesome. I'm trying to find vinyl of Luther Vandross that's actually in reasonable condition. Surprisingly difficult. Her thoughts on Hudson Mohawk. Had a moment that I feel like should have been longer than it was. Like, I was never the biggest fan. I kind of thought the albums were kind of really hit and miss. But I feel like there was more there that we never really saw fully realized. What happened to your year-end retrospective list? I'm going to end off here. Year-end retrospective lists are going to be coming back in 2023. I'm going to be introducing a new higher level Patreon tier in order to drive towards some of that. Stay tuned for early 2023. We'll have some conversations on what that will look like. Opinion on Matt and Kim. Don't really have one. They had a moment in the indie pop scene. I was never really a fan. We'll go with that. Also, any year-end lists that are coming. I don't think there's any of them that are blocked as of right now. I want to say the majority of them are actually still live. Did you hear Purity Rings EP Graves opinion? I heard bits of it. I was never really grabbed by it. Thoughts on the new Pokemon news with Ash. I mean, they got to give him that almost seems like a sign to me they might be moving away from Ash as a character, because part of his arc was that he was never very good at Pokemon, and now finally winning. I mean, it feels long overdue. Why do you set the list on dishonorable mention for hits? Why do you set a list on... Okay, hang on. Why do you set the limit on dishonorable mentions for hits at 7? That's generally as many as I want to do. I feel like going more than that just overpowers the list overall. But okay. Thoughts on 070 Shake? I've never been as impressed as I want to be. I feel like she's made okay music, but I don't think the hooks really pop off for me. I don't think the writing is great either. Are there any great albums that you can't re-listen to? Last Daughter's album, for obvious reasons. I don't know what that is. Okay. Thoughts on Melt Banana? Heard a little bit, not as deeply as I would be comfortable speaking on, to be honest. No, I don't care about Matt Walsh. The less I hear about him, the better. What's your opinion on Young Lean? That's a good one. I have messy opinions on Young Lean, partially because I feel like I've heard chunks of his music where it's worked, but also periods that just has not at all. And let's keep going here. Okay, let's see what else here. And finally, I'll end on this. Thoughts on the new Joji album. I've got a short form album review coming for that very soon. We will see how that goes. And you know what? I think that's going to end things because we are coming up on 3 o'clock. I've been here for 2 hours answering all your questions. Once again, thank you all so much for all the super chats. I greatly appreciate it. Yes, I did hear that Kevin Conroy, the Batman animated series, died. Rest in peace. Once again, thank you all for sticking around so long. It's been a consistent about 100 people here. Y'all are the greatest. Short form reviews are coming. Probably one either later today or early tomorrow. We'll have to see how that goes. And until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse. I'll see you next time.